All right, I am going to get started so we can respect everybody's time. My name is Catherine Valega. I am a certified financial planner and enrolled agent. And today we are talking about cracking the college cost code. There's so much important information to be shared about the college application process. So I am just going to jump ahead. So. Let me know if you have any problems seeing my screen. So immediately, I wanted to give you the four keys right up front in case you have to jump. These are the four keys. Number one, you have to lead the college selection process. Parents must lead this process in collaboration with your child, but the parents really should be leading the process. Number two, higher education is actually a buyer's market. So we're going to learn all about that too. The third, we're going to teach you how to gather the what we call the PEGs, price of the school, expected family contribution or SAI, graduation rate, and starting salary in order to start the initial uh, college choice process. And then number three, number four, understanding how financial aid works and how to get the best price. So why we are doing this is to prevent families from taking too much debt, right? These numbers are actually a little bit old, but you can see there's almost $2 trillion of student loan debt. Um, and I actually see a lot of debt with my current clients on the young end, preventing them from potentially buying homes. And on the later end, really handcuffing them in their ability to decide when they're going to retire, really sort of enjoy their later years because they're still saddled with debt. So the problem is that families are overpaying for college, they take on too much debt. And like I said, they're dipping into either home equity or savings, retirement plans. And one of the reasons is because they get into the college process late in the ball game, right? So it's this like late stage college funding stress. So there's a lot of dynamics that are involved with the college funding dynamics, a lot of competitive pressures. I don't know where you're calling in from, but in New England, the our students have this pressure from their peers, even if parents aren't pressuring the kids, they're getting the pressure at school. Colleges are super aggressive in their marketing. If you have a high school, high schoolers, even early high schoolers, you'll see the mailers that they get, sometimes the tchotchkes. School counselors aren't really trained on working with families in determining what their budget is. And very often it's hard to find a lot of great data on the schools. So as a result, and I mentioned this before, we send our kids to very pricey schools, and that results in a lot of difficult decisions for us as a family in terms of our financial plan, either taking out home equity loans, second mortgages, or working longer than we want to. So we are hoping that after today, you're going to feel like a more empowered college consumer and hopefully avoiding the late stage funding pressure that that we all tend to get sucked into. So hopefully you're sooner rather than later in the process. So let's start with the first key. Like, what is the number one thing, the first thing I need to know so that I can avoid overpaying? And I mentioned that up front, right? The first key, parents must lead the college selection process. So the child is a co-pilot, but you have the most to lose in this process. So parents must lead this process. So it's better to know how this works at the beginning of the process. So a couple things to think about. Um, the percentages of dropouts are very high. Even higher is the percentage of freshman year transfers. And I have seen this with my own kids and their friends. There are a lot of kids who start at one school and realize it's not the right one for them. And what that does is that Well, hopefully they don't drop out, although I have seen that too. And those poor kids are setting themselves up for a lifetime of less income than if they had a bachelor's degree. But I've also seen the kids who transfer, and now we've gone from 4 years to 5 years, maybe even longer in terms of our college tuition years. US News and World Report gets a lot of press. Stay away from these rankings. Um, it's mostly kind of advertising and publicity, and it's not measuring what is really important. So, question number two, right, is how do I send my child to a good school without blowing up my savings? So the reality is higher education is actually a buyer's market. So even though you will read headlines that talk about, all the rejection rates and all the costs, it really is a buyer's market, and that's what we're going to discuss today. Discounts, that's the phrase that we use, are really, really common. So 61% of students at public universities are not paying full price, and 90% of students at private schools are not paying full price. So the discounts are very, very common. On average, the tuition discount at private schools is over 50%. So this is just one example, right? If we take a tuition of 45,000, an average discount, and our real price is 20. So why? Why do we see these price cuts? A lot of admissions directors are not meeting their admissions goals. So a lot of state schools, only 36% met their goals by May 1st. And even at private schools, they are nervous about missing their goals. Only like the very top elite schools have no problem. They're always going to attract enough people who can pay. So, what do we need to focus on in order to navigate this process successfully? We want to gather what is called the PEGs: price, expected family contribution, or student aid index. So you will hear in this world EFC and SAI. SAI is a new term that came out a year ago with the reform of the FAFSA. So you'll see them kind of interchangeably. And that is really what we are expected to pay as parents. We want to look at the graduation rate for schools and the starting salaries. So again, this is PEGs: price, expected family contribution, graduation rate, starting salary. So price, or how do we do this? How do we determine what the true cost of school is going to be? So there is something that every school is mandated to have called the net price calculator. You can Google a school net price calculator, and they will have their own formula for giving you what is the true potential price of the school. And it's kind of a fun exercise to do. I took one example and I did Northeastern. Depending on how robust the net price calculator is, ideally, it's asking you your income, your child's income, your tax filing status, if you own a home, what's the home equity, your retirement assets, your taxable assets. The really good net price calculators are also going to ask you for your students' GPA and test scores. But when you are going through this exercise, again, just Google the school net price calculator. And if financing school is an issue, you really want to look at this before you decide to put that school on the list. So when your results are bad in terms of, very high net price calculators and what they expect you to pay, then you want to have honest conversations with the kid about the reality of sending them to that school, even when they get in. So again, you'll need some recent information, and the good net price calculators are going to also ask you for your GPA and test scores, and that's going to help calculate merit aid. they're required, all the schools are required. There is a very wide range of how good they are, however. So you'll start, and I really want you to pay attention to some of the data that they are going to provide. So the federal calculator, which you will find on some large public universities, really doesn't ask enough questions, and sometimes they're not an accurate picture of what the net price will be. Just pay attention to that. So your expected family contribution, or SAI, student aid index. I want to make sure I get everything here because there's so much good information. So this is determined using the FAFSA or the CSS profile for private schools. And again, you'll hear interchangeably EFC or SAI. And this is going to take into account all of those things that I were mentioning before, and sometimes even more information, depending on whether you're going to a public school or a private school. Some will have a higher weight of home equity. Others are reducing that weight. Some aren't counting it at all. But it is complicated, the two different calculations. So the main calculations I was saying is the one that's tied to the FAFSA or the student aid index. And then the institutional formula are used for college, private colleges. There's less than 200. Let someone in here. And that is tied to the CSS profile. So when you get your EFC or SAI, it's going to be expressed as a dollar amount. And lower income families will have either a $0 EFC, it can even be negative, up to 1,500 negative expected family contribution. The higher your number that you calculate, the larger the more you are expected to pay. So you want to work on getting this number as soon as possible. So don't wait until junior or senior year of high school. You really want to work on having an idea what your EFC is as soon as possible. Write down this website, studentaid.gov/aid-estimator. It does a really good job once you plug in some information of giving you your number without having to complete a full FAFSA. You're not going to do that until your kid is now like applying to school. But go on to studentaid.gov and do the estimation as soon as you can. So I'm going to give you an example. This is a kind of a mass affluent family, adjusted gross income, 200,000, cash, taxable investments, 125,000. There's some home equity. The federal methodology, which is the SAI that comes out of the FAFSA, this determines that the parent's contribution for the student, based on that, the broad numbers we had in the prior slide, is going to be 46,400. So in general, that is what you are expected to pay. Now, I know that my high income clients in New England or coastal areas, clients in California, Seattle, etc., very often they can be making in excess of 400, 500,000, but they're still the schools are expecting that they can pay $50,000 a year. So even when they're making that much, it's tending to get spent. And the thought of having a $50,000 a year bill is ridiculous. You can see for the institutional methodology, which again are those less than 200 private schools, the parents' contribution is a little bit less, and they do expect students to contribute as well. So this is a big change, which really kind of stinks. So I have four of my own daughters, and we have multiple years of kids in school at the same time. And up until basically about a year ago, the federal methodology schools or FAFSA schools, SAI schools, if you had more than one child in at the same time, they would take our prior contribution, the 46,400, and they would divide that by two. And so now if I had two kids in with my expected contribution of 23,200 and there was a pricier school, I might qualify for some aid for that one kid. Well, the reform threw that away. So for public institutions, we no longer get that student discount with two kids in a public institution at the same time. This is really a big deal that people need to be aware of. The institutional methodology, those 200 private schools, they do, however, give you a little bit of a discount. So you can see we're at 41 before. They're not having it, but you are getting a discount of having two kids in private schools at the same time. So when we calculate our EFC, this example in this school, the cost of the private college is $60,000. If we have an EFC of 65,000, our demonstrated financial need is zero. So we are not going to get any need-based aid. And I've had clients where their EFC is $100,000 a year. So basically, that school says you are full pay, you're not going to get any need-based aid. So that's the key here, need-based aid. However, this is another example. Let's say the cost of the private college is $75,000 a year and our expected family contribution is 55. Well, we do have a demonstrated financial need of $20,000. So we might qualify for either need-based aid and or merit. Okay, so merit and or potentially need-based aid. So some strategies for you to think about, right? Hopefully you will calculate your EFC or SAI. If you have lower, smaller EFCs, we want to think about in-state public universities. They provide a lot of need-based financial aid. We want to make sure we're filing the FAFSA. Now, this is once your child is applying, we want to file the FAFSA as early as possible. It opens October 1st. You want to get your FAFSA in there because the sooner the better in terms of state grants. And then we want to look for colleges that are really generous with their need-based financial aid. When you have calculated a larger expected family contribution or student aid index, we want to look at private colleges that give good merit scholarships. So we may not qualify for financial aid, but we want to look at the private ones that are going to give good merit. Now, what is important to know early in the process is that the most elite universities, so they tend to be Ivies and Northwestern, MIT, schools like that, like the top of the top, they give very little to no merit scholarships to affluent students. And when I say affluent in the college world, it's really kind of mass affluent. Because again, think about that EFC of $200,000. We still had a pretty high EFC that the schools said we can pay every year. And I know that's really kind of not reality, right? If we're making 200, there's no way we can scrap out $50,000 a year for our kids. So when we have the larger EFCs or SAIs, we want to avoid those elites. And again, early on in the conversation, because your kid might say, I'm going to Harvard, I'm going to Stanford, and that's great. But if they get in and you're looking at that full tuition bill of 90,000 plus per year, you don't want to have that conversation around, guess what? We can't afford that. That is too much for us. So when you have the larger EFCs, you want to look at schools that offer great merit scholarships. So we want to go on. Remember, I mentioned that website before, studentaid.gov, aid estimator. And once you have your EFC, now we can work on targeting the right kinds of schools. So there's some additional data that we want to pay attention to. And the statistics are pointing to a lot of our kids are not graduating in 4 years. And this is really important as a family paying for college for one, two, three, however many children, is that 4 years may not cut it. And you can see even 6 years may not cut it. There's 30% of students who are not graduating in 6 years. So when we're doing our calculations, you want to keep that in mind about, is my child going to take 4 years or are they going to take longer? Sometimes it's because they've transferred in that first year or even beyond, or they have changed majors. So you really want to have a heart-to-heart conversation with your child about the expectations of graduating in 4 years, and not five, six, even more. Salary. So I'm going to give you some information on where to find some data. There is some really great um, surveys and organizations out there that have come up with starting salary per school and per major. This is fascinating. So you also, not only are we thinking about the type of aid we might qualify, we also want to think about the major that our child is thinking about. Now, I know in reality, a lot of kids start college and then they change majors, and I see that, and I really think that they should be allowed to, because it's hard. What 18-year-old knows exactly what they want to study? But if you have kids who are like super driven and they know they want to be a doctor or they want to be an engineer, what have you, or even in liberal arts, sometimes it's more important the choice of major than the choice of school. So this website, this is the Foundation for Research on Equal Opportunity, freeup.org. They have calculators that allow you to plug in a school and a major and look at the first year anticipated salary and then actually over the lifetime. You can do that for both undergrad and grad school. So this is one example. We looked at University of Virginia, the return on investment. And we can see, for example, in the first major, aerospace, aeronautical, and astronautical engineering, the expected salary at age 25 is 73, almost 73,000. So over the lifetime, our ROI, they have calculated 1.45. And that includes what we've spent for the degree. And you can kind of go down the list. Now, ironically, the next one on this is anthropology, and I'm sure you can guess it does not pay a lot. So the ROI really after what we have spent on that degree is really pretty bad. So the data is just so fascinating to dive into. And if your child has an idea of what they might want to study, I would say take a look at it because it really does go school by school. So this is a resource that I have that I offer my clients. Um, Actually, I should correct. There, I have something else that I offer. This is you can find on the college scorecard, the federal college scorecard. So you can go in and hold on, let me just see. Someone put something in the chat. I will try to do a replay. Yes. You can go into the collegescorecard.ed.gov and you can type in a school, average cost, etc. But what I want to tell you, so it's kind of another calculator to what I mentioned before, is when I did it for Boston College, it says it's a 4 year college, but this graduation rate, I screenshot the actual note, is 8 years. So you have to be very careful with the data as you are poking around and be skeptical and sort of keep poking and doing a lot of great research because okay, a 91% sounds great, but in no way I'm paying for Boston College for 8 years, right? So the fourth key, will my kid qualify for aid? This is best to know kind of how the aid works. And we want to understand, again, going back to our EFC and SAI. So, number one, we have grants, which are just free money. They do not need to be repaid. Um, their grants are mostly need-based. So, those are for families that have the lower EFC, SAI, and very often they're coming from the state or federal government. Then you have scholarships, which are also great free money. They do not need to be repaid. They are merit, typically merit type scholarships. Now, you don't have to think that my kid has to be, a 4.5 average and the band director, um, sorry, or something super like, diverse. Sometimes it goes down to just geographic location. So, one of the tips that I like to tell my families that I work with is, if you're calling from New England, right, you know that we have a lot of great schools, and sometimes our kids are like, I just want to stay up and down the coast and go to all these like lovely New England schools that we have. But if you have family or cousins or even just a link to another part of the country, I would consider other public and private schools in other parts of the country because just our pure geographic diversity, they want kids from New England, right, to go there because it's filling out their the diversity of their talent pool. So you don't have to be like a superstar or captain of all the things in order to get merit. Then we go to loans. So we have the federal direct loans and then the direct plus loan. And there's some important information that has just changed in this world, which is really, really important. So first of all, federal direct loans for undergraduates, these are the best loans to take. They can take a maximum, your child can take a maximum of 31,000 for their undergraduate degree, okay? So just know that there's a maximum available for them that they can take. The direct plus loan is available for parents. Um, what's changing after July 1st, 2026, is lifetime limits available for both parents and kids. And the graduate loans, and I just want to mention this, I know you may not be ready for grad school, but the graduate lifetime limits are have been lowered. This is a big deal. And there's also a total amount that our children will be able to borrow. Total lifetime aggregate limit for undergrad and grad school of 257,500. And the reason why I'm mentioning this is if your child is considering what's called a professional degree, doctor, lawyer, dentist, veterinarian, we know that grad schools are going to cost 300,000. So it's important to think about the trajectory of your child because it also impacts how much debt we want them to take as a student, an undergrad student, and how much debt we're willing to undertake for them as well. That 257, I think, is kind of an arbitrary number. It's not going to support the $300,000 plus costs of med schools and dental schools. And so what's going to happen is that our kids are going to be forced to go into private loans. So there's companies that are going to stream into that market and they're going to be able to charge what they want. So it's really important. You can just Google like changes to federal student loan programs, but you want to think about this now because it should be impacting what we're thinking about in terms of debt for our undergrads. So the other options, right? Home equity loans, home equity lines of credit, that has gotten more difficult recently because rates have gone up. Was fine if we were borrowing at 3%, but now at much higher rates, this is pretty much a drag. And then private loans. right? They may or may not be available for you. They're going to be higher interest rates, and you really need good credit in order to qualify for them. So federal aid grants work study jobs. If you qualify for financial aid, your kid can do work study. We probably are all familiar with them. They're great opportunities. You sit and you let someone into the library and you get to study at the same time. So if your kid qualifies for those, great. Even if they don't, here's a trick. Even if you don't qualify for need-based federal aid, complete that FAFSA form anyway because sometimes those work study jobs are not all filled by the need-based kids, and your child may be eligible to take one of those work study jobs. And if you've ever done the tours, you can walk around the libraries and you see all those little numbers saying call us for the research job or whatever. So that's a trick. Fill out the FAFSA regardless of whether you think you're going to qualify for aid because your kid may be able to get the work study job. Um, Loans for students, parents, tax credits, etc. States, they vary widely in terms of what type of money they give. You can Google this as well, National Association of Student Financial Aid Administrators, to find out what your state offers. Most of the state money is going to go to low income students, but there is some based on merit. So state universities, in-state schools are often the cheapest, but not always. So something to keep in mind is, again, depending on where your child has applied and the potential merit, which is increasing, sometimes our private schools, when we receive merit money, are going to be cheaper than the in-state schools. Okay, so I know I talked about, the most elite, they are the most expensive, don't offer merit, right? If you qualify for financial aid, great. Um, and don't assume you won't qualify for financial aid. You really want to run the numbers. But when you don't qualify for financial aid, don't exclude the private colleges because sometimes that merit is better than the full cost at the in-state school. So again, you can Google the name of the schools and the scholarships, and take a look at, what they would offer. Again, some of the most popular schools like the Ivies, they don't need to offer merit scholarships because they've got plenty of people to apply to them. Again, aid at private colleges. What I had mentioned before is that sometimes the price tag is less than the in-state universities, based on the merit money that you receive. So this is really saying if you are not going to be qualifying for financial aid for need-based aid and money is tight, those elite, most highly ranked universities are not the ones to focus on. So the earlier you can have a conversation with your child about the reality, right? I had somebody call me that said, my child just got into Wellesley, her dream school. How am I going to pay for it? That is too late to be having the conversation. Our kids are working so hard and we are so proud of them and we want them to go where they want to go, but you want to be realistic and you don't want to bankrupt your own future, um, right? Because there's plenty of great schools out there. So that being said, the next round of schools are sorry, I should say the elite schools are great for financial aid. So if you do qualify for financial aid, then you do want to consider going to some of those elite schools. And I know it kind of seems broken. It's really kind of middle income parents that pay the penalty. If you're lower income and you qualify for financial aid, then by all means apply to those elite schools. If you are middle income and don't qualify for aid, for financial aid, you want to look for the next round of schools that offer merit. So what you're doing is throwing a wider net of schools. We don't want to overpay, we don't want to take on too much debt, and we don't want to enter into this too late in the game, right? Because it is a pressure cooker and our children are stressed, the families are stressed, everybody's just trying to work and pay the bills and live their lives. So don't do this too late. So what can we do? So I work with my clients in a couple different ways. The first way is looking at their current resources to say, how much of our goal is potentially funded. So this is one example. This is a sample client. We took Ava and we looked at the resources that the parents had saved. She wanted to go to NYU, and we can see that, well, guess what? Her funding is her goal is only 40% funded. But if I take a state school, New York, SUNY at Albany, we are much closer to, we're not 100% funded, but we're doing better, right? We're closer to 70% funded. The other thing that we do is we plug into this database that's going to give us all of the information. So this isn't just my numbers. It's going to give us our numbers. And now this is where we're plugging in the students' information, their GPA, their SAT, and it's going to give us kind of an affordability number. This is not the same AVA, so I'm using different numbers. But here you can see that Northeastern, I want my child to go to Northeastern, but the affordability index for me is telling me to like watch out, right? So again, going back to those four keys, parents must lead the college selection process. Higher education is actually a buyer's market. We want to gather the pegs, that's just the acronym, the price, the expected family contribution, the graduation rate, and the starting salary to start the process. And we want to understand how financial aid best works in order to get the best price. So work on your college funding strategy now in order to find the best school at the best price, right? I make a joke that no one ever brags about paying full price for college, ever. You want the best school at the best price. And there are plenty of schools that exist. And at the same time, you're going to be protecting your own future goals. So schedule your consult. I'm going to give you my information in the next slide. We will work on calculating your SAI, EFC. We'll talk about where the money is going to come from, and then we'll start developing a list of schools where you might be able to expect the most type of aid. There we go. So that is my email, cvalega at Greenview Advisory, phone number 781-863-5800. There is so much information. And in fact, this presentation, I mean, how many slides have we done? Almost 100. I have double the amount of slides. I had to cut so much to get it all in. There's so much great information. The earlier you do it, the better. I'm also happy to have conversations with you and your family, including the kids. I think it's really important to be honest with them. And I actually think you need to be having these conversations, as they start high school, because they are working so hard and they have their mind set on these dream schools, but you really want to know the reality of the prices and if you can afford it, if they're considering grad school, et cetera. There's so much that goes into it. So have the family conversation sooner rather than later. Thank you so much for coming. I'm going to stop.